This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are TNT Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi Tanya.
Hi Talia.
Hi listeners.
Hello everyone.
I hope everybody is having a great day.
Me too.
I'm having a good day.
It's been a good day.
It's Friday.
Hallelujah. Friday is my favorite day of the week. There's so much promise.
And then Monday comes and all your dreams have been shit on.
I know. Sundays are very hard for me.
Because, you know, the next day's Monday.
Absolutely.
I feel the same. I know I say this all the time, but I have a really interesting episode lined up for you today.
What is it on the gruesome meter, Talia?
This would be a 10 on the gruesome meter, but I am going to filter this. I have to filter this. However, for all of our members, if you are so inclined, I will make sure that we do another part to this and post it on our members only with the details. Today's going to be, I was going to say PG, but it's not going to even be PG. Today's going to be really high on the gruesome scale. It's still going to be high. This is not a whodunit. This is what did he do? This is about a guy named Gerard Schaefer Jr.
I've never heard of him.
No?
No.
I am shocked because he actually was friends with Ted Bundy.
Really?
In prison, he also hung out with Otis O'Toole, Adam Walsh's murderer. He even wrote a book. The book is called Killer Fiction, and that is a 10 on the gruesome scale. So I am going to do a members only episode on that and include some more of the details of the murders I'm going to talk about today. This book, Killer Fiction, that I'm not going to talk about today, it's got reviews from John Wayne Gacy and Danny Rowling. Do you want to know what John Wayne Gacy has to say about the book?
Of course.
It says, Schaefer's writing is graphic and keeps the reader wanting more. He's done his research, and it reads as if he has tried it all.
He's done his research on his own murders that he did?
Well, he says that they're fantasies.
Oh.
But today's episode for everybody else out there is really great, and I'm ready to do it.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. On March 25th in 1946, Gerard Schaefer Jr. was born to Gerard Schaefer Sr., surprise, and his mother, Doris. It was a shotgun wedding. The two were very Catholic, but obviously not that Catholic.
Not 100%.
Because she was pregnant. They were not very thrilled to get married. As a matter of fact, Gerard Sr. resented his son for being born, basically, for taking away his freedom. However, the couple, Gerard and Doris, ended up having 2 other children, daughters, that they adored. At a young age, Gerard Jr. noticed that his sisters were treated really, really well, and he wasn't. So he would put on his mom's clothing and try to act like a girl to get attention from his father, but that did not work, and his father actually punished him. His father did not want his son dressing up as a girl. When he was a child, as children do, they play, and they have role-playing. His pretending time was always about him killing himself. It always resulted in him dying at the end of all of his games that he played.
As a child?
As a child. Before he was even in school, he would reenact his own death. He was a little socially awkward in school, as you can probably imagine. And he was described by his peers as being insensitive and morbid. Around the age of 12, Gerard started stealing underwear from his sisters and mom. He would then go into the woods and kind of just hang out there wearing their stolen underwear. So he spent more and more time hanging out in the woods and eventually started tying himself to trees and binding himself. He got a lot of pleasure from wearing women's underwear and binding himself, and he wasn't even in high school yet. But as it happens with everybody, when you get your favorite thing, it no longer becomes your favorite thing. You need more. So he needed to take it to the next level. He set out traps, snares for rabbits. He got a rabbit, and he tortured and killed the rabbit. And he was so sexually excited that this became his new thing, torturing animals. Ugh. Surprise! Before Gerard was even a teen, he was reaching orgasm by hurting himself, binding himself so tight that it caused him severe pain, killing animals, and cross-dressing in the woods. In the woods, Gerard felt like he could be himself. He felt alive, and he began a very unhealthy detachment from humanity. In 1960, when Gerard was 14, his family moved from Atlanta, Georgia, where Gerard had lived most of his life, to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Gerard attended a Catholic school when he was there, and he developed an interest in girls. There was one girl that really caught his eye. It was his next-door neighbor, Lee. He could see Lee's bedroom window from his bedroom window. He became obsessed with watching her through the windows. And in Lee's defense, she kept the blinds closed most of the time.
Oh, thank God.
But like all of us do, there were a few times when she had the blinds open. Now, Lee didn't feel any romantic inclinations towards Gerard. But when her tennis partner at the tennis club got injured, she asked him nicely, like a neighbor, "Hey, do you want to be my new tennis partner?" Which, of course, creepy Gerard accepted. Being that Gerard was new in Fort Lauderdale, he didn't have a safe spot in the woods to act out his fantasies and his animal torturing. So without that release, Gerard couldn't really control his impulses, and he ended up stealing the underwear from Lee's clothesline. When he did that, he felt a thrill he'd never felt before. It was like his first trophy. Apparently he didn't get that same thrill from stealing his mom and sister's underwear.
Who puts their underwear out on the clothesline?
This is 1960, Tanya.
I know, but don't you think that's a little odd?
This is 1960. I don't even know if they had dryers back then. Seriously, I had a clothesline growing up. You didn't have one growing up.
I did, but my underwear weren't out there, I'm pretty sure.
You don't know.
I don't remember them being out there.
Well, hers were. And
Lee,
I don't
girl.
really like your judgmental attitude right now. Are you done?
I guess.
It was probably her mom. Do you think she did her laundry? Come on.
No, yeah, absolutely her mom.
So it was her mom. While he was in high school, Gerard found another distraction from Lee. He met a girl named Sandra London. He played the role of a normal boyfriend with her, and he kind of acted like a normal human being, but at night he would continue to spy on Lee, often while wearing her underwear and harming himself until he orgasmed. Now, during one of the makeout sessions he had with his girlfriend Sandra, Gerard became very aggressive, and he started ripping off her clothes. This freaked her out, and she completely rejected him. She was like, "No, I'm not into that." So he broke up with her. He moved on with his teen life. He got a driver's license. With this driver's license, he got a new sense of freedom. He had the ability to drive. So he could now drive himself to various forest locations and act out his fantasies. He began setting up intricate rope systems in these mangroves. Do you know what a mangrove is?
No.
Mangroves are trees that grow in clusters in salt water, and they're the ones that you would see with all the roots up.
Oh, okay.
Their roots are exposed. So he often hung out in wetlands, also known as forests. I'm not a botanist. I'm doing my best. So he had these intricate pulley systems that he would set up too, and he would then put himself into the ropes and bind himself, again, as painful as possible to get aroused. He continued his torture of animals and himself. By his senior year of high school, he intentionally sought out easy girls. One particular girl, her name was Cindy. She was known around school for putting out. He would take her to the forest and rip off her clothes. They would enact rape fantasies, and in these fantasies, he would chase her through the forest. Eventually, this role-playing got out of control, and Gerard became too violent, and Cindy broke up with him. In 1964, after Gerard graduated from high school, he decided he wanted to become a priest.
No.
Yes.
All that good Catholic school upbringing?
Yes. He was rejected by the seminary school because they said he lacked faith. He was so angry at being rejected that he renounced his faith and he never went to church again. So given his dreams of being a priest were no longer in play, he decided to attend community college. He continued to act out his fantasies in the woods. However, the killing of animals and the self-harm and all those twisted things he was doing, they didn't satisfy him anymore. On October 2nd, in 1966, 20-year-old Nancy and 21-year-old Pamela, two friends, they went with their boyfriends to a place called Alexander Springs Park. It borders on the National Forest, and they went there to go scuba diving, so it's right by the ocean. When the girls felt the water, it was too cold for them, so they decided they weren't going to go scuba diving, and instead they went for a hike in the forest. They passed by a few families on their walk, and they didn't realize that farther behind them, following them, was a young man, their age. It was, of course, Gerard. He eventually got closer and closer to them, and he started making conversation. When he was talking to them, he found out that they really wanted to go to the beach, so Gerard offered them a ride. They agreed. He led them to the parking lot where his car was. They got in. Instead of driving them in the direction of the ocean, they got further and further out into the wetlands. But the girls were in the back seat. They kind of treated him like a taxi cab driver in essence. So they were just talking to each other and they weren't paying any attention. Eventually he stopped the car near a cluster of mangrove trees. When he did that, the girls asked him, what's going on? He just gave a little wave to them and he got out of the car and he went to the trunk. He pulled out some rope and a gun. And he went around to the back seat and he put the gun in the girls' faces. He instructed them to get out of the car and to walk deep into the scary Everglades. He told them during the walk that he was a CIA agent with special instructions to keep them safe.
Oh, stop it.
Yes, that's what they said. He proceeded to tie their hands behind their backs. He knotted the ropes. And he tied Nancy really tightly to a tree with kind of a pulley system. He had a noose bound to a branch, and he put it around Nancy's neck. He could pull on it like a pulley system, and it would pull on Nancy's neck. And her hands were tied, and he would also tie their legs around their body. He would put a rope. So while Nancy's got this noose around her neck, Pamela took off running. Unfortunately, with mangrove trees, the roots, as I said, are all exposed, and she tripped over the roots. So he grabbed her by the hair. He dragged her back and placed her in front of Nancy, where he tore off her clothes. He forced her onto her knees. He tied her up more, and he repeatedly raped and tortured Pamela. He forced Nancy to watch, and he told Nancy if she didn't watch so she could know what was going to happen to her, he was going to gouge one of her eyes so she could still have the other eye to watch.
I have major anxiety right now.
They only get worse.
Oh.
Nancy threw up as Pamela was being brutalized. And the entire time, while Gerard is just raping and torturing Pamela, his biggest pleasure was from taunting Nancy, telling her over and over again, this is what's going to happen to you. That's what got him more aroused than the actual rapes. Eventually, he choked Pamela to death during the rape, and then he did the same thing to Nancy. The girls' bodies were never found, and for years, their boyfriends were considered the prime suspects. So for a few years, in the book that I'm talking about, which is a Ryan Green book where I got this information, there's no descriptions of the murders that occurred for about 3 years. However, I do know that Gerard continued to murder people. They're just not listed as the victims that we know of for a fact. In 1969, Gerard began attending the Florida Atlantic University. Not long after he arrived there, he met a woman named Martha, and she became his first wife. Gerard was still friends with his old neighbor, Lee. You remember Lee?
Yes, poor Lee that he stalked.
For years, by the way, he was obsessed with her. Lee invited Gerard and his wife, Martha, to attend her wedding, which was a month after Gerard's. After Lee's wedding, Gerard and Lee began talking on the phone a lot. And Lee's new husband was like, why do you keep talking to Gerard all of a sudden? I mean, they were friends, but this was a lot of phone contact. Eventually, Lee confided to her husband, Charles, that Gerard worked for the CIA.
Come on. She fell for the CIA line?
Yes, her husband did not. Her husband thought that was absolutely ridiculous.
Thank God Charles' bullshit meter was on the spot.
Right? However, Lee believed that she was going to get a job working for the CIA with Gerard for $20,000 a year. On September 8th, in 1969, Lee's husband came home and he discovered a note from Lee saying that she was driving to Miami, and at the time they lived in Fort Lauderdale, so it's like a half-hour drive, to talk to Gerard about the job. By the time Charles had actually found that note, unbeknownst to him, Lee was already tied up between two trees. He tied each wrist to a different tree, and then her ankles were each tied separately to different trees. So she was standing spread eagle. This was Gerard's fantasy for years, and it was coming to life. He put a noose around her neck, and he raped her. He continued this through that day, up and through the night, and into the morning, torturing her as much as he could. He really never wanted to stop, but he had class in the morning, so when the sun rose, he had to kill Lee. He eventually pulled on the noose around her neck, again like a pulley system, until she choked to death. Then he buried her in a shallow grave in the swampy, muddy soil. He drove her car to the Fort Lauderdale airport, and he left it there. Then he went to his college classes that day. While he was in class, all he could think about was Lee, and he didn't want to let the fantasy go. So he went back to the mangrove trees, and he dug her up.
No, stop. No.
And he dug her up.
No.
Yes, he did. And you know what he did to her? You know what he did to her.
I know what he did to her.
Yeah, he had sex with her body over and over again. Then he reburied her. But he couldn't let her go.
No.
So he came back the next day.
No, seriously?
And he dug her up. And he had sex with her corpse. And he reburied her. When he went to dig her back up again, he couldn't do it. She was bloated and decaying, and he was like, no.
Oh, that stopped him.
That stopped him.
Wow. That's messed up.
And in the book he wrote, that's going to be an episode in our members only, he talks about having sex with dead bodies and the problems associated with it, such as decay and maggots and excrement.
Oh my God.
And he talks about the difference between him and Ted Bundy in the conversations they had. Ted Bundy didn't have a problem with maggots, and he didn't have a problem with the rotting, but Gerard did.
I'm flabbergasted. It's just disgusting.
Charles reported Lee missing. Lee's brother reached out to Gerard and said, hey, we know that you were talking to Lee, and she was supposedly going to see you. Can you tell us what happened? Gerard told him that Lee had called him asking for a ride to the airport because she said she was going to go to Cincinnati, Ohio for something. And he told her, yeah, I'll give you a ride. He goes, but then she never called me back. And so all I ever have is that phone call from her. Lee's car was found abandoned in the Fort Lauderdale airport. The police believe she just kind of ran away, and her case went cold. Around the same time that Lee was murdered, Gerard had changed his major to being a teacher and actually completed some of the training he needed to get a job as a student teacher at the Plantation High School.
He's getting a job as a teacher.
As a teacher at a high school. On December 18th, 1969, a cocktail waitress, who's very beautiful, by the way, named Carmen, called her sister-in-law, really excited, to tell her that she'd met a nice guy. He was a student teacher, and she had a date with him that night.
No, Carmen.
She brought a pretty black dress and some new black shoes. 4 hours after calling her sister-in-law, Carmen was stripped naked, tied to a tree, gagged, and left with a noose around her neck, while Gerard moved her car from the restaurant where they had met to an empty parking lot outside of town to throw the police off. When he left Carmen there, tied to a tree with a noose, he made it so she was tied to multiple trees, and the noose was pulled so tight that in order for her not to choke, she had to be on her tiptoes. If she were to go flat-footed, she would choke and strangle to death. Eventually, he came back, and he raped and tortured Carmen 4 hours. Then he killed her by slowly tightening the noose around her neck. Her body was buried in the ground of Boca del Mar. A week later, on Christmas Day, when Carmen's sister-in-law hadn't heard from her, they reported her missing. She was missing without a trace until 1978, when construction began for a new subdivision. During the digging phase, they found her bones.
They were able to identify her?
Eventually. Gerard's job as a student teacher at the Plantation High School didn't last long. I know you thought he would be a great teacher to high school girls, but it didn't last long. He got caught sexually harassing the young female students.
Creeper.
He was a major creeper.
How old was he about this time?
He's about 24. Gerard did not handle this rejection very well, and he took it out on his wife, Martha. He became violent with her, and he raped her. Instead of going to the authorities, because at that time, believe it or not, you couldn't rape your wife, Martha just divorced him, cited intolerable cruelty as the factor for divorce.
I'm surprised he just didn't kill her.
He thought about that.
He did?
But he is different than a lot of other serial killers. He had a massive fear of getting caught so he could control himself. And he literally thought to himself, if I kill my wife, they're going to come to me, and then I won't be able to kill anymore. And he loved to kill, but he did think about it. He did want to kill her. As I had talked about earlier, Gerard researched other killers. He, during this phase of his life, was particularly fond and fascinated with Albert Fish.
Oh, are you
kidding
kidding
me? You know more about Albert Fish than I do. He ate kids, right?
Mm-hmm. And he would stick pins
in
his genitals and everything.
God, yes. Gerard would study all of these serial killers. He really wanted to, A, learn their techniques, and B, make sure he didn't make the same mistakes they made to get caught. He also researched a lot about the decomposition of bodies because he wanted a better understanding of ways to prevent it. He had issues. God, I can't believe I'm going to say this. He had issues with maggots. Apparently, after 3 hours, it's a guarantee there's going to be maggots on a body. According to him, not me. I don't know.
The things we learn from this podcast.
So sick. Oh, I can't even see a maggot in my garbage without
freaking out. I know.
Won't make sweet love to something with a maggot on it. 11 days after Carmen's death, on December 29th, so it's just a few days after Christmas, in 1969, this is going to get hard, Tanya.
No, it's already been hard, Talia.
9-year-old Peggy was brought to Pompano Beach, Florida, to play with her uncle. 8-year-old Wendy, a fellow schoolmate, was coincidentally there at the beach, brought there by a friend to play. So the girls began playing. Around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, they were given money to go just down the road to get some ice cream that was at a nearby convenience store by the beach. As they were walking, Gerard approached them and he started making conversation. He bought them ice cream and he convinced them to let him drive them back to the beach. Once he began driving, he put the child locks on and the girls started screaming. They realized this is bad. He took them to the mangroves and he stripped them. He tied little Wendy to the tree and he put a noose around her neck. And I'm not going to go into all the details. He put the noose around Wendy's neck, and for some reason, the innocent bewilderment of the girls took away from his pleasure. He relished when his victims could comprehend what was going to happen to them, but these little girls were just so confused that it was a big turnoff for him, and it really made him mad. So he did something he'd never done before. He actually started punching little Peggy, and he beat Peggy to death, and he didn't rape her. He pulled the noose tightly around Wendy's neck, and he killed her too. Now, just when you think to yourself, Talia, this can't get any worse, it does. He decided to see what it was like to eat children's bodies.
Okay, I'm like, oh my God.
I'm not going to get into the details.
Oh my God, this is really bad.
He did cut off parts of their flesh, and he cannibalized the girls. He later stated in his writings that they tasted good with onions and peppers.
How have we not heard of this sick fuck?
I don't know.
Because this is insane, this story.
I just thought I was buying a little cop killer book. I didn't know.
I mean, I'm fucking traumatized. And we've heard a lot of shit, Talia.
Yeah, I know. This is not even the detailed version,
I know.
Tanya.
I don't know if I can handle the detailed version.
That's why we're not doing it today. That might be during wine time. Anyway, the girls were reported missing. Police sent divers in the water to look for their bodies. But the guy that sold them the ice cream said that he saw them talking to a guy, a white guy who was 6 feet tall, who actually paid for the ice cream. There were no real leads, though, and their case went cold. Martha and Gerard's divorce was finalized, and to get over the pain, Gerard decided to go on an extended trip to Europe and to Africa, where he continued to kidnap, torture, and kill women. He purposely sought out the countries with the most corrupt governments and the weakest police forces so he could brutalize a woman and get away with it. He went to bestiality shows and torture displays. I'm not going to get into the horrific murders he committed overseas on this episode, but they are what takes this off the charts on the gruesome scale.
And what, he's in his 20s?
Yes, he's only in his 20s. In 1970, at the ripe age of 24, Gerard worked as a part-time security guard at an office where he met his next wife, Teresa. Teresa moved into his house. She actually helped him take care of his mother, who was getting older. Gerard decided he needed a career change, so he thought the perfect job for him would be a police officer.
Oh, no.
At the age of 25, he got his very first full-time job. He was a police officer at the Wilton Manors Police Department in Florida. Also at this time, Gerard met a woman named Belinda. Belinda was 22 years old. She was a prostitute and a cocktail waitress. Belinda was a very unique young woman. She would actually advertise in the personals section of porno magazines and other seedy publishings, specifically for rough, violent sex. No matter how aggressive and how violent Gerard was with her, she liked it. She willingly went with him to the Mangroves and let him hunt her down and act out violently raping her. They actually had a relationship for 2 years, even though he was married. On January 5th, 1972, Belinda left her husband, he was a drug addict, and her 2-year-old daughter. She left them at their house, and she went on a date with Gerard. Her husband saw this man in a blue Datsun in their driveway and watched her hop into the car. Gerard took Belinda to the Mangroves, and the two of them began acting out the usual hunting of Belinda and the violent rape fantasies, like they always did. However, this time, Gerard became overwhelmed with his urge to kill. As she was running through the Everglades, he grabbed her by the hair and he knocked her to the ground. He then proceeded to drag her by the hair, face down, over the roots of the mangrove, deeper into the forest. When he finally stopped dragging her and she looked up, she saw that there were various ropes hanging from the trees already, and she actually thought that was pretty cool. He put her arms in different rope loops in different trees and pulled them as tight as possible. Then he bound her ankles apart and pulled them as tight as possible. Because she was actually bound laying down, spread eagle.
I don't want to picture it, but okay.
He knotted a rope and then put the knot part in her mouth and tied it so tight around her mouth as a gag that it was crushing her face. Then he took another piece of rope, and this is thick rope. He put 2 other knots in it, and he placed the knots where her eyes were, over the eye sockets, and he pulled as tight as he could so the knots went into her eyes. Then he took another rope with knots in it, and he tied it around her neck. And he tied it so tight that she began to lose oxygen. It made it really difficult for her to breathe, but she could still breathe a little bit. Then he had intercourse with her, and he loosened the rope around her neck. He cut the ropes that bound her to the forest floor, but then he tied a rope around her neck and her feet, and he picked her up and carried her like a suitcase, scraping her body along the mangrove roots. He carried her behind a tree where there was a grave dug. She tried to talk to him. It was really hard for her because he had tied the rope so tightly at one point around her throat that it was difficult for her to make out words. He then threw her into the grave and he knocked the wind out of her. He grabbed a shovel that he had strategically hidden. He grabbed some dirt and he threw it on her face. She actually managed to utter the words to him, "I'm alive." He paused and pretended that he actually cared for a moment. Then he buried her alive.
Oh, Talia. Oh my God. We're definitely going to have wine time.
Belinda was reported missing by her husband several weeks later. The police actually considered him a suspect because of their lifestyle, and they never really investigated her disappearance in any sort of real depth. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Do you want a shameless plug?
Oh, yes, please. I'm desperate for one.
Yeah, let's grab a coffee.
All right.
Hey everyone, if you go to our website, tntcrimes.com, you can find full unreleased episodes available for individual purchase. You can also join our membership where you get unlimited access to all of our unreleased episodes and early releases, mini episodes, and so many other awesome things. So go to tntcrimes.com, and thanks again for all your support. We're back.
Unfortunately.
You can't say that in our podcast. It's supposed to be a good thing. Tanya.
I'm sticking with you, Talia.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sticking with us during our episode. Okay. So, as I stated, Gerard worked at the sheriff's department. And while there, he became really good friends with a man named Deputy Lowe. Teresa and Gerard would go to Deputy Lowe's house for a cookout with his family. And then the Lowes would come over to Gerard and Teresa's house, too. They hung out. Tanya, Deputy Lowe had a 13-year-old daughter.
No.
Yes. Named Deborah.
Oh, Deborah.
On February 29th, 1972... Deborah was walking the 1-mile walk to her middle school in Pompano Beach, Florida, when Gerard pulled up in his blue Datsun. He offered her a ride to school, and she accepted. He drove her to the wetlands and started making lewd comments towards her, like she needed a real man. Made her very uncomfortable. And she was a smart girl. She realized it's 1 mile to my school. Where are we going? When he got to the wetlands, he stopped the car, and he went to get out of the car and go to the trunk. And when he did, he must have forgotten to lock the doors because Deborah took off running from the car. He was surprised at how quick she actually was. He started chasing her, which of course thrills him. And being that Deborah's not used to running through mangrove trees, she fell over the roots and he caught her. He ripped her clothes off, he handcuffed her, he did what he normally did. He tried to kiss her and she bit him. He then threw her down in the mud, tied her to various trees, and you get what he did to her. He spent the entire day with 13-year-old Deborah. Eventually, he killed her, buried her in a hole he'd dug up already. The next day...
No, he didn't.
He came back, he dug her up, and he had sex with her corpse. He actually visited her body continuously throughout the week and stopped having sex with the dead body once it started falling apart again. He was not into decomposition.
Oh my God.
So gross.
Oh, poor Deborah. These poor women.
She wasn't even one.
I know, she's a child.
Deborah's family reported her missing when she didn't arrive home from school because they thought she'd been at school all day. They found her books a block away in a trash can. The worst part is, Gerard helped look for Deborah with his friend Deputy Lowe and comforted Deputy Lowe. To this day, Deborah's body has never been found. About a month after Deborah's death/disappearance, Gerard got fired from the police department. Do you want to know what he did? He was a creeper.
I'm not surprised.
He would pull over pretty women. Then he would run their information through the system and get their addresses and visit them at their house and tell them that they had to go out on dates with him. Or he would give them tickets and things like that. Enough women reported him to the police department that he got fired. He, of course, couldn't tell his wife this, so he just lied to her and said it was a result of police politics. And she believed him. But don't worry, Gerard got a new job at the Martin County Sheriff's Department in Stuart, Florida. That's about an hour and a half north of Fort Lauderdale. He had to go an hour and a half away because all the local police departments had heard about the creeper, He had to go far enough out where nobody heard about him. So he moved Teresa and his mom an hour and a half away. It took him about a month to find the perfect spot in the forest to serve his purpose for killing. He picked a place called Hutchinson Island, which is a swampy, desolate area, and that's where he started taking his next victims. On July 21st, 1972, two young women, their names were Pamela and Nancy, which is, of course, the exact same names of his first victims. And what are the odds of that?
I know.
It's the second set of Pamela and Nancy. Pamela and Nancy had recently just traveled to Stuart, Florida for a vacation, and they were in their late teens. They were staying at a hostel, which ended up being a little farther from the beach than they had wanted. On the morning they arrived, they decided to hitchhike to Jensen Beach to spend the day sunbathing. Gerard, of course, is in his patrol car, and he sees these hitchhikers, and he says to them, it's against the law to hitchhike, which actually it wasn't. So he said, get in the car, I'm going to drive you back to where you're staying. And he did. He drove them to the hostel, and he said, you know what, girls, listen, I don't want you to get in trouble hitchhiking anymore, so how about I pick you up tomorrow at 9, and I'll give you a ride to Jensen Beach. And they were like, okay. I mean, it's a cop.
It's a cop, right?
Sure. Hey, free ride. He showed up there the next morning, and when he did, he was in his street clothes and his blue Datsun. This made him a little uncomfortable. However, he convinced them to hop in. Being that they weren't from the area, it took him a while to figure out that they were heading the opposite direction of the beach and to the wetlands. Gerard made up a story when they started asking questions. He said, I was once a teacher, and there's this really cool Spanish fort deep in the forest. I just want to show you it. Just let me show you it. He parks the car at the edge of the mangrove trees, and he's like, get out and let's walk. God bless these girls. They're like, we don't want to see a Spanish fort. We want to go to the beach. No, we're not going to walk with you. And it pissed him off. So he pulled out a gun, and he pointed it at Nancy's face. He handcuffed the girls with their hands behind their backs, and he put gags in their mouths. He then forced them to start walking deeper into the mangrove trees. He told Nancy and Pamela along the way that he was going to sell them to some bidders in Europe, and they were going to become sex slaves. It took them almost 2 hours to get to the spot in the wetlands that he had prepared in advance. And when they got there were the pulley system with all these ropes and a shovel. He tied up Nancy, and he placed a rope again around the outside of her legs and a noose around her neck. And he pulled the noose so tight that Nancy had to stand on her tiptoes. Her feet had to balance on these mangrove roots, and if she were to fall, she would choke. He then did the same thing to Pamela. Just when he was getting ready to brutalize these women, he got a call on his police radio. He was told he had to come down to the station.
He had it on him?
Yeah, he had it on him. I don't know, maybe he's on call.
Oh, probably,
something like
yeah.
that. He wasn't expecting to have to work, but this is how it went down. So he left the girls out in the forest, and he warned them that he would be back. And when he came back, they actually needed to decide who would be sold into slavery and who would be killed, because the buyers had told him that they only wanted one girl. And I don't know if that's what he pretended he heard on the radio, but for some reason he told the girls he just got news that one was going to live and one was going to die, and they needed to pick which one was which. It was a psychological torture that he really got off on. When Gerard was driving to the police station, he had some time to think. His plan for Pamela and Nancy was going to be a new twist in his usual game of torture. He was going to kill one girl and have sex with a corpse in front of the living girl, because he thought that would be an extra exciting way to brutalize them.
What a fucking sicko.
Sicko. There's something interesting and fascinating about the dark side of human nature. While Gerard was gone, the girls managed to get the gags out of their mouths. He must have been gone for a long time, because after a few hours, their handcuffs started burning their wrists because they're in Florida and it's July and the sun is beating on them. Eventually, Pamela's feet began to slip and she began hanging, choking with the noose around her neck. Now, Nancy is an amazing person because in a brief few seconds, she made a do-or-die decision. She knew the way they were standing that if she could lean forward and swing a little bit, she might be able to move her legs between her arms and get her handcuffed hands from behind her back to the front of her and then try to rebalance herself. However, if she couldn't rebalance herself, she would die. And the goal was if she could get her hands in front of her. Remember, the noose has a string. She could grab onto that string because it's a pulley system and loosen it. So in a split second, she made the decision to try it. She did it. She swung. She put her legs up between her arms. She started losing consciousness, but managed to get her feet stable on the root again. Took her hands and loosened the noose from around her neck. Then she went and she grabbed Pamela, and she was able to take the noose off of Pamela. Eventually, Pamela began breathing on her own. So both girls were free from the noose. So they took off running. They ran and they ran for hours. And eventually, they found a road. At the same time they hit the road, Gerard came back to the forest. He went to the spot and found that they were gone. He was shitting bricks. There were 2 nooses swinging empty. So he was searching for them everywhere. They found a truck and they flagged the truck down. And the truck took him to the closest police department, which happened to be the police department Gerard worked at.
No.
They told the police there what happened. And the police weren't sure exactly how to handle this. Gerard, after looking for the girls for a while, knew he was...
His goose was cooked?
Yes, his goose was cooked. So he had to come up with a plan. He called the police station, and he told his boss, he goes, I have this crazy story. He said, Sheriff, I've done something foolish. I made a dumb mistake. He then proceeded to tell the sheriff that there were these 2 young women, and they were hitchhiking, and he really wanted to teach them about the danger of hitchhiking. So he took them to the forest and hung them from a tree for a little while. Now the sheriff, he really wanted this to go down smoothly, so he told Gerard, listen, come on in, we'll straighten this out. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. So Gerard came to the station and he was immediately arrested. The next day, he was released on a $15,000 bond. But he knew he was going to have to serve some time. The judge considered what Gerard did to be foolishness.
Foolishness?
And Gerard had an idea that he was probably going to get a year in jail. He really wanted to get his fair share of killing in before he was gone for a year. So now Gerard really went on a rampage. On September 27, 1972, 2 teens, Susan and Georgia, were at Susan's house, and they were telling Susan's mom, Lucille, that they had a ride coming, and this ride was going to take them to the beach so they could listen to some friends play guitar. Susan told her mom, don't worry, I'm going with a guy named Jerry Shepard, not Gerard Schaefer. He used to be a teacher. He's going to supervise it. It's going to be fine. Jerry Shepard showed up in a blue Datsun, and the girls hopped inside the car. Lucille was smart enough that she took down the license plate of the guy, but she did it because she was more worried that her daughter might just take off. Not so much be in trouble, but willingly take off. Gerard, of course, started driving, and he took the girls out to Hutchinson Island, where he'd taken Pamela and Nancy and gotten caught, by the way. On their drive there, the girls started questioning him, and he told them, I just want to show you this old Spanish fort. Susan and Georgia willingly followed him through the forest, and they never came home. Lucille called the police to report Susan missing. She gave him the license plate number, but it ended up that she had wrote down one digit less than she was supposed to. After a while of driving around, she realized in the particular county they were in, the license plate started with a 4, but the next digit was always a 2 for that county, and she realized she forgot to put a 2 in. A month after Susan and Georgia disappeared, and now we're in October of 1972, two 14-year-old girls, Elise and Mary, went to Pompano Beach to hang out for the day. Gerard started talking to the girls. He got them some ice cream, and then he convinced them to let him take them home. When they got in the car, he put the child locks on, and that really creeped the girls out. So they started screaming. To muffle their screams, he cranked up the radio, and he just started driving as fast as he could. While he was driving, one of the girls from the back seat started clawing his face. Then she stuck her fingers in his eyes. And he was desperately trying to get his pistol out of the glove box while he was being attacked. Eventually, he found a spot where he was comfortable pulling over. Then he climbed in the back seat. And he's 6 feet tall. And these are 14-year-old girls. He sat on one of the 14-year-old girls. And while he did that, she was unable to move because he kind of crushed her. And the other girl, he strangled. And once the girl turned purple from being strangled, he felt more comfortable, and he proceeded to pretty much rape and torture the other girl. When they were both dead, he spent a little more time with them. He spent a few hours with them.
Jesus.
And he describes himself when he was done with the girls. He got out of the car. He had blood on his mouth, blood on his hands, and blood in his private areas. He looked like someone from a horror film. He hauled the girl's body to a wooded area, and he dug some graves. This was actually only about a minute's walk from the local high school, that Plantation High School that he used to work at. Elisa's family reported her missing the next day, but Mary's family assumed she ran away, so they didn't report her even missing for a week.
Oh, that's pretty sad.
About 6 months later, they found their remains. He had pulled all the teeth out of their mouths and threw them around to help prevent them from being identified.
Good God.
It took some time to pull all these teeth out.
I'm traumatized, Leah.
I know. So less than a month after the girls were murdered, he got sentenced to 1 year in jail for the kidnapping and assault of Nancy and Pamela. One year. 1 year. As a matter of fact, the judge was so lenient on him that he let Gerard stay with his wife and mother for the holidays, and then told him he needed to turn himself in January.
He probably killed somebody over the holidays, right?
You are spoiling this.
Of course.
He's not in prison yet, so he's got a week left of freedom. He's doing what a lot of serial killers do. He's trolling. He writes about how he drives all over, looking for the perfect victim. On January 8th, Gerard was driving around Biloxi, Mississippi. Now, this is 9.5 hours away from Stuart, Florida. When he was there, he came across two 19-year-old girls named Colette and Barbara. They were on a hitchhiking holiday from Iowa, and their intent was to make it from Iowa to a beach in Florida. So they were absolutely thrilled when Gerard offered them a ride all the way down to Port St. Lucie, Florida, which is about 20 minutes away from Stuart, Florida, where Gerard's from. When they arrived at a place called Oak Hammock Park, the girls were actually sleeping. Gerard woke them up by pointing a pistol at them. He already had ropes hanging from multiple trees waiting for them. He had a shovel hidden up in some branches. He bound the girls to the trees, and he forced each one to watch the other be raped and tortured. He actually, oh God, I thought it was over the gruesomeness. I'm sorry. He actually mutilated them while they were alive, removing parts of their skin.
Oh.
I know. When he was done torturing them for hours, he killed them and he buried them. 1 week later, on January 15th, 1973, he turned himself in to the Florida State Prison to start his year-long sentence. While he was in prison, his past began catching up with him. In March, the police were able to trace the license plate number because Lucille, Susan's mom, was able to figure out that the digits were off a little bit. And they traced it back to Gerard's blue Datsun. Then on April 1st, 6 months after Susan and Georgia went missing, 3 men were looking for aluminum cans. They wanted to actually recycle them to get some drinking money. And they stumbled across the decomposed remains of Susan and Georgia in the mangrove roots. The medical examiner examined the girls' bodies, and he concluded that both girls had been bound to the trees because they still had ropes tied to their bodies. Somehow he determined that they were mutilated alive. A bullet was found in the jaw of Susan, but it couldn't be determined how Georgia died. They believe that Georgia probably received the brunt of the torture with the noose, and Susan was probably killed in the mouth to shut her up. The police got a search warrant for Gerard's blue Datsun, but when they searched it for trace evidence, they found out that he had been smart enough to clean the car with peroxide and bleach, so they didn't find anything. Next, the police got a search warrant to search his home. This is where they found a plethora of evidence. In the house that Gerard shared with his mom and wife, he had his own specific room that they never went in. In that room, there were 11 different guns and 13 different knives. Now, the knives had been scrubbed clean by Gerard, so there was just no trace evidence available. But they also found hundreds of photographs Gerard took of himself wearing women's underwear tied up.
He had photos of himself in his house?
Yeah, and that reminds me of BTK.
Oh, for sure, BTK.
Same thing, wearing women's underwear, torturing himself. They also found hundreds of photos of women that Gerard appeared to be stalking. They also found photographs of prostitutes who were clearly aware their pictures were being taken. In addition to the photos and the guns and the knives, they also found news clippings of Lee's disappearance and the jewelry she was wearing when she went missing. There were newspaper clippings regarding Carmen's disappearance, also a gold tooth that was later identified to be Carmen's gold tooth, and a shamrock pin she wore. In addition, they found Barbara's driver's license, Colette's passport, a book of poetry she wrote, and her diary that she had been making regarding the hitchhiking experience she had from Iowa to Florida. Gerard kept a purse that belonged to Susan in his room and some jewelry of Mary's. But the most disturbing thing they found in all of that, as if that wasn't disturbing enough, were the over 100 stories that Gerard had written regarding the rape, torture, and mutilation of, quote, whores and sluts.
When he was a short story author?
Yes!
Really?
Except that many of the stories match up completely with the actual murders.
So he's just recording his memory.
And he admitted that.
And this is how we know all these details,
yes.
Right?
Except there's over 100 stories. On May 18th, 1973, Gerard was indicted for the first-degree murder of Susan and Georgia. In October of the same year, he was actually convicted of the murders. He got sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. His wife, Teresa, divorced him, and his mother never spoke to him again. Just when you think this story is done.
Oh my God, Talia, there's more.
It's just a twist. It's not horrific. The writings of Gerard that were found in his room were eventually published, again, in the book Killer Fiction that I'm going to do an episode on, by his ex-girlfriend from high school, Sandra London. Now, coincidentally, Sandra had a true crime writing career going on when she found out that Gerard was a serial killer. So she wrote him, and they reignited their relationship.
Really?
They became engaged.
Really?
She got the copyrights of all of his drawings and writings, and she published 2 books, and then she dumped him. Another person Gerard got close to in the Florida State Prison, besides Ted Bundy, was Otis O'Toole. He was responsible for Adam Walsh's murder. Gerard became close to Otis because he wanted to get favors from the prison. He would extract parts of the murder confession of Otis from Otis and then tell the investigators about it.
About Adam Walsh?
Yes.
Get out of here.
I'm not making this up. It's the craziest story ever. Gerard was actually working with the investigators when a fellow inmate killed Gerard by stabbing him over 40 times in the eyes, too, and slicing his throat. In summary, we basically know that Gerard is at least responsible for 34 deaths. I didn't go through all 34. That's a firm number everybody believes. However, if you look at his writings, it's well over 100. He claims that he killed for over 10 years in 3 different continents, probably between 80 to 110. Little side note to end it with, Gerard would sell his soiled underwear to paying customers outside of prison. He would place ads in porno magazines pretending to be various women such as Mistress Felice, Matron Miller, and other weird names, and he would sell them soiled underwear for a fee.
So they were women's underwear.
They were women's underwear.
He catfished people for dirty underwear?
It's so
That's best. That is so wild. Oh my God, I needed something to laugh about with this story.
So
what a sicko, man. I tell you.
This story,
you couldn't make this up, Talia.
I know.
Imagine the poor guy out there that bought some underwear from Matron Miller and he totally got in Mistress Felice and they totally got taken. Oh gosh, that's crazy.
So anyway, there we go. Okay. How do you end this one? Let's do some shout outs.
That sounds great.
Shout out to Emily and Samuel and Stephanie, our newest Patreon member. Thank you guys for supporting us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and actually, Samuel bought us some wine and Emily bought us martini.
Thank you. I need that after this episode.
I know. They did that on our website because on our website, you guys can help donate to us to help support us because we don't get paid.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. I hope you have a great weekend. Oh, and where can they find us?
So you can visit our website, tntcrimes.com.
Our Instagram.
At TNT Crimes. Facebook. Twitter. At TNT Crimes. Patreon. We just recently moved over to Patreon. There's all kinds of bonus content and goodies on Patreon. So.
Yeah, we're going to have 7 episodes on Patreon by next week. And we have a lot of bonus videos.
So check it out.
Check it out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Until next time.
Till next week, America. Yeah. Keep your feet on the ground.
And keep reaching for the stars. So stupid. Bye.
Bye.